maybe eventually, people here would start changing in certain directions toward other parts of the world, and vice versa, where things might eventually mesh. But I don't even know that that's even a long-term eventuality. So we need to. The point being that while we might have an ideal and we might like to see a world that comes together, and we've got this wonderful political globalization that we can imagine, maintaining diversity and respecting diversity within that, it's a vague ideal, and it's probably pushing it for us to have a concrete picture of that at this point. So let's prepare for the possible eventuality of not being able to do that. So we're going to have international relations at some point, or inter-country or inter-societal relations. But now I'm going to take us back to that smaller scale, because I do want to bring up a few things that are a little bit odd. Geography is a strange way to define community. There are a lot more qualitative factors that we could see being more important. But with respect to diversity and with respect to a lot of other things, and with respect to just social reality of how do we, this was brought up in the first class this morning. What if we didn't use geography to define it, but we used some other method to define community? Well, one thing we could see is a lot more interaction between people from different communities. Well, maybe your next door neighbor lives in a different quote-unquote community because of the way we've defined community. The problem being, I don't even know what community my neighbors are part of. We lose the assumption that when we deliberate and discuss things with our neighbors, that we really are trying to seek common interests around something that we have direct input in. We start to lose something. I do think that we're kind of stuck with geography as a way to define that lowest level of polity. Now, does that mean that we look at the map that we have today and we say, well, I can define everything from states and provinces all the way down to certain neighborhoods? A lot of cities have neighborhoods that are quite distinct, and you can draw lines and consider those boundaries. Do we want to do that? Do we want to do what we've already got? Do we want to do the easy way before, the way that it already is, before we even talk about changing it? Why wouldn't we?
There's a lot of arbitrariness about that. Those lines are drawn by people that, conquered the indigenous culture.
Right. It isn't even just arbitrary. Some of them are arbitrary, but some of them are devious.
Yeah.
So if rejecting this political system, and we this room full of people has decided it's at least worth sitting down and talking about a radically different one, then why on earth would we want to allow the influences of that former one to carry over and sort of define the new one that we're trying to build? So we would need means to go about sensible ways of defining new communities, or just adjusting borders in some ways. Now I'm gonna go off on a mini tangent about participatory economics, because this is going to actually lend something to us, to our little project here with regard to defining boundaries and hopefully diversifying communities, and possibly having people come together because of interests that aren't so bound by things like race and ethnicity, but by actual interests that weren't imposed on people by cultural standards, the color of their skin that they were born with, because we are talking about, remember, radical changes in the cultural sphere. We are talking about new ways of defining race and community, etc. Okay, now the participatory economy, for those of you who get to, I think, part 3 in the Pericon course, what's going to happen is you're going to start learning that allocation is going to have an impact on where people want to live. What a participatory economy does is it says it makes sense for you to live among people who have similar interests, because that way, I could be a very selfish person. It's not selfish, but I want a lot of personal consumption. I want a bigger house. I want my own vehicle, which would be incredibly expensive in a participatory economy, and that kind of thing. And I don't really care about public goods. So I want to live in a community where the majority of people there sort of agree with that, and we all say, well, we don't need to share a lot of stuff. We can, we're the type of people who like to live on our own. It's not a great example of things, because it's not necessarily the most wonderful way that we want to live, but I'm not sure it would even happen that way. But the contrast to that is having a place where we live very modestly in our personal lives and with our families, but we actually have lots and lots of public goods. We have parks, we have sports facilities, we have museums, we have libraries, and all those sorts of things that we've decided is more important than our own, private possessions and that sort of stuff. This is going to actually lend itself to diversity. Not right off the bat. It's going to be the kind of thing that takes change over time. but it's going to be the sort of thing that makes it less scary to draw geographical boundaries in neighborhoods in higher levels, because people will actually be moving across them. Okay, we want to make sure that that's encouraged. We want that free association, to bring up the dangerous term, to still be in play here. I can leave this political area, and I'm not, or I would want to leave this political area because there's economic interests in possibly doing so. Okay, so it's not the end. It's not the end of the world to start drawing things geographically, even though it still seems kind of arbitrary in some ways. What would make it less than arbitrary? It's already been brought up. Bioregionalism, interesting concept. Most bioregions are larger than the municipality level or the community level that we're discussing. But once we get up to that next step, the economy, and Michael Albert, of course, and I actually agree with him, has a strong critique of bioregionalism as an ideology. However, that doesn't mean that an economy that is designed with by intelligent people consciously wouldn't say, well, the bioregionalists have offered us one thing. It does make sense to actually organize regions around these bioregions. It's certainly less than arbitrary. They're saying, well, nature has sort of established these regions that we can define, and bioregional scientists have actually done a pretty good job. But I don't know anything about it, but it seems that they've put a lot of thought into it, and there's no reason that we wouldn't look at that and say, well, maybe that's the way we end up defining our regions.
Maybe I'm just confused. I don't understand how bioregions would be relevant to, I guess, harmonious human organization. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't see.
Because we don't stick to them the way a bioregional ideology does.
Yeah,
right? We don't.
One way.
Yeah, we don't limit travel. We don't limit trade by them. But we do identify that, hey, there is something to be said for not over exchanging. There is something to be said for not for knowing where we live, for knowing things about our actual region and being informed by that. It's an idea, and I don't know how far it will go. I don't know how appealing it would end up being, but it's an idea, and I wanted to voice it, especially since a couple of people had commented on it, and I am sympathetic to it.
Well, I mean, I feel like you said, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, I think that as an ideology, it does have its limitations, but I mean, like, where I'm from in North Carolina, like, people who live in the mountains, I mean, it's a long fucking state, and people that live in the mountains have very different existence than people that live in the flatlands, even though a lot of them are still farmers. You know, they grow different stuff. You know, it's a completely different climate as far as, like, it's much cooler in the mountains, there's more trees, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, I feel like also, like, it informs culturally. Like, the cultures of what people, you know, how people support themselves and what their daily lives are like is going to inform, you know, their concerns culturally, socially, you know, kinship-wise, the whole thing. And so I feel like, you know, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, I agree personally, and we'll see, you know, how people feel about that as certain ideas are popularized. And I think that the best aspects of bioregionalism deserve to be popularized along with any idea I've come up with.
A little more on that too. I mean, there's specific resources in certain areas which are really important. I don't know how that goes, but say if you have the desert and you have like fertile rainforest, there's different resources in each place. So if we look at what the people in that region have to work with, and is it going to be switched around? So, like, yeah, I'm just pointing out resources in particular for each area.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to get too. I don't want to harp on on this particular detail too much. But what we need to do in the lesson that I want to impart, sort of, is that we need to be thinking about these things, and we need to come up with rational, or at least reasonable and informed ways to define ourselves and ways to define our political systems. Are you going to talk about bioregionalism?
No. I guess I'm just thinking, I guess a lot of it would be bound because of if it's all, are we assuming that all these things are functioning on the kind of participatory economic system?
Yeah, that's what we've been assuming for the purposes of this class, I think.
So the polity wouldn't really drift that far even if there were autonomous groupings because it would be to a certain extent bound and on the same principles. So I would imagine it would be that the polity levels, polity scales would be very much bound by economy. It only makes sense. I don't know an argument against it, and if someone wants to raise one, that would be actually pretty interesting for me because I've been just kind of, a lot of these things are kind of default. I'm just sort of assuming that I don't know another argument. So.
To tell you the truth, I have no idea where bioregional is. I'm absolutely lost.
Okay, and I don't think it's all that important. We can talk about it later, but it would really spoil things, I think, if we got too much into that, because it's not something I'm thinking is fundamental to understanding this.